Well, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. You've been at the Hoosier here for about a year now, so let's kind of start by introducing you to the public. I understand you graduated from IUSP and you're married to a Hoosier native, so you're kind of coming back home here, I guess, in a way, when you came to the Hoosier about a year ago. Can you give us a little bit about your background and sort of how you ended up at the Hoosier National Forest?
Sure. Yeah, in a lot of ways I do consider it coming home. My wife is from Bloomington originally. We've been coming back here when we lived elsewhere for many years to visit relatives of hers that still live in the local area. I'm from Virginia originally. Got my bachelor's degree from Virginia Tech there in wildlife science, after which I went and joined the Peace Corps and spent 2 years in Morocco working as a wildlife biologist in what was, at the time, it was a proposed national park in the eastern High Atlas Mountains. Beautiful area, wonderful experience in a million different ways. Learned a tremendous amount during that 2-year time period. Going in, I expected for my career going forward was going to be largely spent as a wildlife biologist. That was primarily my interest at the time. But it really, like a lot of folks who end up in the Peace Corps, it ended up being one of these life, career-altering kind of experiences. And I was living in a very remote area in, like I said, a proposed national park at the time that had several villages inside the park boundaries, outside the park boundaries, people very much tied to the use of the natural resources for their livelihoods. And that really kind of shifted my interest in more of the social side of things and how people relate to the land, how they live off the land, how decisions that get made about conservation issues affect people in very real ways on a day-to-day basis. So that got me a lot more interested in the policy side of things and how decisions get made on public lands and on natural resources issues. And just by luck, I stumbled across some information for the SPIA program while I was still over there in Morocco. Kind of fit the bill pretty well for what I was looking to change gears into. And so yeah, I ended up here in Bloomington at IU, going to SPIA, and finished with a dual master's degree there in public policy and environmental science. After I wrapped that up, I started with the Forest Service initially in Washington, D.C., working out of, the Forest Service has an international programs office. So it's kind of a nice meld of natural resources experience along with the international experience. And I worked there for a number of years coordinating our technical cooperation efforts all over Africa. These are mostly with sister agencies and with NGOs that partner with the U.S. Agency for International Development on environmental related or natural resource related issues. So setting up a lot of trainings and coordination and learning between the two agencies in different countries. Like I said, all over the continent. Great job, fantastic opportunity, learned a million things out of that experience. But my focus was always wanting to get down to a more distinct piece of land, be able to work at the more localized level with local communities, with local employees, on decisions that get made for managing a piece of land. So I transitioned after a while and went initially to Arizona with the Forest Service on the Coconino National Forest, where I was a deputy district ranger out there, based out of Flagstaff. Was there for a few years and then was a district ranger, most recently on the Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon, outside of Portland. And then landed in this job. It was the kind of thing where I was in a great place there on the Mount Hood, loved my job, loved the place where I was working. But when I saw this opportunity that this job came vacant here on the Hoosier, I couldn't resist putting in for it, and things worked out well. So it's just a great part of the country and a place I really love, and I'm glad the chips fell where they are, and very happy to be here.
So you've experienced the desert area, you've experienced the mountains, and now you're back here in the hinterland. Well, let's talk about the Hoosier then. The Hoosier is one of national forests in the eastern region, which includes 20 states from Minnesota to Missouri to Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and on up to Maine. That's a pretty diverse area, very heavily populated. Kind of how does the Hoosier fit into kind of that large of an ecosystem, and kind of how does that system work?
Yeah, it's complicated is the short answer. Yeah, you're right. We are part of this large area that covers 20 states in the east, northeast, midwest. In a lot of ways, even though the acreage is much smaller here in terms of national forests and public lands in the eastern versus the western part of the United States, the issues become a lot more complicated. Eastern national forests, and this is certainly true for the Hoosier, tend to be very, very fragmented and chunked up into pieces. And so it create some complexity for how you manage the land. You have a lot more boundary line, a lot more neighbors. From an ecosystem standpoint, the land base is in many different ownerships, some of it public in different agencies, state level and federal level, and a lot of it in private ownership. So it makes things complicated. As far as the Eastern Region management, as a forest supervisor, I'm part of what we call the Eastern Regional Leadership Team, which is all the forest supervisors from each national forest in the region, along with the regional forester and the different directors at the regional office level. And we get together occasionally to coordinate on issues that are common amongst us, share lessons learned, examples, things like that, and also communicate through that avenue to our Washington office about what are the needs, what are the differences, what's the context for the Eastern region, to our Washington office, who of course is hearing from all the other regions around the country as well. But this, the Hoosier National Forest is really, it's maybe not the most fragmented, but it's pretty close to being the most fragmented national forest in the whole system across the country. And so even though the acreage, again, is much smaller than some of these big western forests, that adds complexity. And what it does is actually force something, in my view, that can be very positive of if you're going to be successful on a conservation scale, you need to work outside your lines, outside the green lines with external partners. You need to work with state agencies, private organizations, private landowners, to reach common goals amongst the group. And of course, that's much harder to do than when you're working just internally with your own folks. And it takes a lot more time and tends to be slower. But the opportunities for reaching a more diverse group of folks and getting people tuned in to the issues from a conservation standpoint, I think are greater because of that.
Are we still the smallest? Is Hoosier still the smallest?
It's the smallest that's still managed as one entity. So you have a number of national forests, like in North Carolina, for example, and Alabama and Mississippi, where they used to be individual national forests. They're now managed under one forest supervisor for the whole state. So that's considered a unit now, and that puts their acreage bigger. But some of those forests are smaller than the Hoosier, yeah.